This workshop is all about local dues waivers. The purpose of this workshop is intended to assist you in forming a chapter standards board or an executive board process for accepting applications and approving local dues waivers. So in this, we are going to cover several different things, the purpose of dues waivers, what some options are in terms of the process and procedures, some examples of the types of applications that you can get from members needing a dues waiver, what your process to approve those might look like, and then why local dues waivers are so important for national dues waivers. So let's talk about local dues waivers. Why should you offer dues waivers? This is a question that we have gotten from chapters over the years, and even recently a chapter discovered that they didn't have a process for offering local dues waivers, and they had a lot of questions which were really great and valid questions. And I think the main answer to why do we offer dues waivers is because one of our sorority's core values is inclusivity. So we recognize that people encounter cases of extreme financial hardship, and that may prevent them from being able to pay their dues and fees. So in order to remove the financial barrier to participation for those members, we do offer this option of dues waivers, and we also offer payment plans. I think it's really important to note that we want to make our sorority accessible and available to all people, and that we also have both the local chapter and the national organization depend on the dues paid by members in order to support the cost of running the organization. So that's why we state that dues waivers are considered in only cases of extreme financial hardship. And let's talk a little bit more about what that means. There's many different ways you could define extreme financial hardship. The most basic definition that I use or think of is that extreme financial hardship is when a person is unable to provide for themselves, their family, or other dependents with basic necessities such as food, accommodation, and clothing. This could be as a result of like a family tragedy, just a financial misfortune, a serious illness, or maybe a natural disaster. So I also want to say here that it could be that paying local or national dues to the sorority would create a situation where someone would not be able to provide for themselves, or that they would have to forego basic amenities, basic necessities such as food, housing, clothing, in order to pay their local and national dues. Of course, this also includes any other extraordinary, unforeseeable circumstances arising as a result of one or more recent events. So it doesn't have to fit into family tragedy, financial misfortune, serious illness, or impacts of a national disaster. It really could be any other serious, unforeseen, difficult circumstance that has arisen and has, again, created a situation where if the member were to pay local and national dues, they would be foregoing basic needs. So payment of college tuition is not considered an extreme financial hardship. You might be surprised that we have to point that out. But I would say anything that has to do with specifically like, oh, I have college tuition coming due, that's expected. That's not an extreme financial hardship. It's expected that when you're a college student that you have college tuition payments that you have to make. We'll talk a little bit more about how the national organization defines extreme financial hardship, but these are the guidelines that the local chapter should use. So what is a dues waiver? I think it is pretty self-explanatory in the title, dues waiver, but it removes the need to pay membership dues for one semester. So it's a semester at a time. It's not for the whole academic year. Members are eligible on the local and national level to receive a dues waiver, and many times, I think like probably 80% of our chapters charge way more in local dues than the national organization dues. So, sometimes members may just need a local dues waiver and they don't need a national dues waiver because they can afford the national dues, but the local dues may be like, in some cases, I think they're like 3 times national dues. So, it doesn't mean that they're all one and the same, or that any member who applies for a local dues waiver must apply for a national dues waiver. So the chapter standards board and the local chapter itself sets the guidelines for local dues waivers. And then the board of directors and the operational leadership team set the guidelines for national dues waivers with input from members of the sorority. So we'll talk about this more, but the national dues is a standard operating procedure, and those are approved by the board of directors. So what is not a dues waiver? A dues waiver is not a loan. So we do encourage members, if they are able, to pay their dues that they had waived in the future, that they can make a donation to the Omega Phi Alpha Foundation or to their local chapter. But a dues waiver is not a loan. It's not guaranteed, and a local dues waiver does not guarantee a national dues waiver. So I think these are 3 really, really important things that we should point out when we're discussing dues waivers. So let's talk about local waiver procedures. Chapters must have written procedures in their bylaws or their procedures manuals. Some chapters have separate procedures, which is a great practice to have. The national organization does as well. So whether you put your procedures in your bylaws or you have a separate standard operating procedure manual, you must have a written procedure for how to manage dues waivers. So they must include a written form of requesting a waiver, a deadline for submission that is prior to the national dues waiver deadline. So not just the national dues deadline, it has to be prior to the national dues waiver deadline, which is typically 2 weeks before the dues deadline. And then this should also include a process for the chapter to review and consider all petitions. We want to make sure that we have as unbiased of a process as possible. So we want to name this process so that we follow it every time. And then you also want to identify what dues and fees are eligible for a local dues waiver. So are there other fees that your chapter charges every single semester that are outside of the membership dues that you would consider waiving for a member, or just the local dues, something to consider. So the application and petition process, there are plenty of options that you can use. So here is option 1. You can develop a dues waiver application that gathers the following information: a member's financial status, details of the circumstances that have created extreme financial hardship. You could ask them to detail some of their financial obligations. I think generally speaking, this question is helpful because I know some members are supporting their family, like maybe helping their parents or a grandparent or a sibling. So general financial obligations, I think, is a helpful something helpful to understand. And then current income. I don't know if this has to be a number specifically, or if it could be like, what is the income that you have coming in? Like, are you working? Those types of things. If you decide to use this type of application, you should have your chapter advisor review the application to ensure that you're not asking any information that is prohibited by your university. I would say, generally speaking, it's unnecessary to collect extremely specific financial information from a member. Just general obligations and status and income, I think, would be ideal if this is the application that you choose. Okay, so the second option is to develop a written application that asks the member to explain the circumstances that have created the financial hardship and why they're requesting a waiver. So that's it. Just the information for why they need a waiver. You should have on here like what they're asking to be waived. Like, if you have additional fees. Are they asking just for the local dues? Are they asking for all of their fee obligations? But this allows for a very short and sweet application, and it helps you all get more information about what the member is going through. The third option is not asking for anything specific in writing, just having them completing an application that confirms the extreme financial hardship and confirms the need for a dues waiver. So just an application that's like name, maybe you just say, are you experiencing extreme financial hardship, and what type of waiver do you need? So just a form that they fill out, and then you could have an interview as this chapter standards board or the executive board, whomever in your chapter is making these decisions. And when you meet with a member, you can get all the pertinent information that way. This obviously is like more personable than written forms and applications. It definitely gives you all an opportunity to hear from your members and check on your members, make sure that they have the basic needs, their basic needs are met, and just really understand what the situation is. So some chapters prefer to do this, some prefer just to do the application. It really is up to you. However, whatever you do, you need to have some way of confirming the extreme financial hardship and that it qualifies them for a waiver. So how do you approve or deny waivers? What is that process like? It's definitely different depending on the application process that you choose. As I've mentioned a couple times, some chapters have the executive board consider applications, and others, these applications go through the chapter standards board. So it's up to you and what your chapter decides. Generally speaking, the goal of the process that you're putting in place here is for the body who is making the decision to determine if the member is experiencing extreme financial hardship. And if so, then their waiver should be approved. Generally speaking, I think there are circumstances where maybe it isn't approved, but as an organization, we take the approach that if someone has demonstrated to us that they are experiencing extreme financial hardship, then their waiver should be approved. So if you do determine that the need for financial assistance is temporary, as in like, I don't have a job this month, but I'm due to start one in 2 weeks, and isn't like some case of ongoing extreme financial hardship, potentially it doesn't warrant a full waiver of dues for the semester. So you can still help them meet their financial obligations. It could be offering a payment plan throughout the semester, which the national organization does as well. And if the member is open to it or interested, is expressing to you, I'm looking for a job, I'm actively looking, and, haven't found anything yet, or whatever the situation may be, of course, you could offer help to locate opportunities to make additional income. But I would not just offer this to someone. It could be offensive if, there's a reason that they don't have income right this minute. They might not be looking for your help. So I think it's important to ask for permission to offer assistance in that way. Some considerations that I think we need to make when we are going through this dues waiver process is to acknowledge that for many people, asking for help is really hard. And often asking for financial assistance comes with a lot of shame. Unfortunately, it's just sort of the world that we live in. And it shouldn't, it shouldn't bring shame and judgment and be so hard, but we really need to be respectful of how hard it truly can be to ask for help. So a few things that you should keep in mind is all dues waiver information that is received on applications is confidential. And then all information gathered during the approval process, especially if you're conducting interviews, is confidential. This cannot be overstated enough that this is personal information that members are trusting you as their sister with, and are trusting you to use it in the way that they've intended. So any information from applications or from meetings or interviews needs to stay within that. And also, I want to acknowledge that we should not publish a list of people who receive dues waivers. The national organization does ask for information about dues waivers that should be like quote unquote public knowledge, but it's just the number of dues waivers. So that's what you should be tracking, is the number of local dues waivers that you've approved and not the names of the people. All right, so let's transition to talk a little bit about national dues waivers. So just like chapters, Omega Phi Alpha as a national organization relies on those national membership dues and fees to fund the operations of the sorority. So currently we collect $75 of active membership dues every semester. And for new members, they pay $75 plus a one-time $50 activation fee. All of the same reasons for requesting a local dues waiver apply to requesting a national dues waiver. They're considered in cases of extreme financial hardship. They are not alone. We do encourage repayment, like I mentioned before, if a member is able, and payment plans are offered. So what's the process for a national dues waiver? It's a little different, so let's talk about that. To even be considered for a national dues waiver, members must have applied for and received a full local dues waiver. Then the member must complete the dues waiver application. It's a DocuSign form. They have to enter all the appropriate information for themselves on DocuSign, and they also have to enter all the appropriate information for the members of the chapter executive board who need to sign the recommendation. So this is just names and emails. So they need to know the names and the omegaphialpha.org email addresses for your entire executive board. This should be common knowledge for your members. You should be making this available to them. But I wanted to point that out here in case that's not something that you're currently doing. You do need to make that available to all of your members. And then the members of the executive board are required to sign the recommendation form prior to the posted deadline. So let's talk about deadlines just for a second, because this has come up in the past couple of semesters. So again, I mentioned earlier in the presentation, but the dues waiver application deadline ends 2 weeks prior to the national dues deadline. So this semester, it's September 15th. So you must have dues waiver applications and a completed recommendation form in by September 15th. So if you have a member that you know is going to be requesting a national dues waiver, you need to let them know that this is the due date. We have already communicated to all members that the national dues waiver application deadline is September 15th. So you need to set your local dues waiver application deadline prior to that, maybe like September 1st, gives you a couple weeks. So if members of the executive board do not sign the recommendation form by September 15th, that member will not be considered for a national dues waiver. So this is a 2-part process, really like a 7-part process, because it requires the member and all executive board members. So we've had chapters upset in the past because some of their officers did not sign the paperwork in time, and then their member did not get a dues waiver. You can pay on behalf of your member if something like that happens. We can apply a payment to their invoice from the chapter, but I just want to emphasize in the strongest way possible that September 15th is the deadline for a national dues waiver, and if it is not submitted in full by then, the member will not be considered. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we would talk a little bit more about definitions. So for a national dues waiver, extreme financial hardship is, again, someone experiencing financial duress due to circumstances beyond their control. Again, that could include illness or injury or natural disaster that causes a large amount of medical bills or a loss of work, could be military deployment, and it could be like a loss of scholarship or income. So I did point out in the beginning that paying tuition is expected and is not a sudden extreme financial hardship. However, there could be like an unexpected loss of scholarship. So let's say it's August, and you realize that you're not getting payments from the scholarship that you've had, I would consider that a recent unexpected loss of scholarship. But if you lost your scholarship in the spring semester and now it's the fall semester, I don't think that qualifies under these definitions. Of course, loss of income can be from any number of things. We often get applications from people who have no income, and sometimes they explain that their school schedule doesn't allow them to have income or anything or something like that. So more details is better when you're submitting the application from that perspective. We understand that sometimes there are class schedules that prevent people from having jobs, but more details on what that looks like are always helpful for us as we consider national dues waivers. What are the limitations to national dues waiver? First, national dues waivers are also only valid for the semester in which it was received. So if you're applying in the fall, your dues waiver, if it's approved, is only valid for the fall, and you have to reapply in the spring. So if the need continues, you have to keep reapplying, and there are 4 dues waivers total allowed. If there are extreme circumstances, we are flexible and we are humans and understand that things happen. So we are happy to engage that on a case-by-case basis. We do offer payment plans. We received a lot of amazing feedback from chapters in this past year, and I had meetings with several of them where they helped me understand what a payment plan could look like that would be really helpful to active members. So we do have a payment plan. It is bi-weekly. It's 3 installments, and you must enter a payment plan on OPA portal prior to the national dues deadline. And there's an option for a payment plan when you view your invoice. If you have any questions about this, we're happy to help. But we do, any dues waiver that we may deny, we do offer a payment plan in place of a waiver. And actually, any member can enter a payment plan at any time. And we did send an email a couple of weeks ago to all active members sharing about payment plans. If you have questions about this and you are watching the recording, you can email myself, managing director at omegaphialpha.org, or you can email Taylor, chapterhealth@omegaphialpha.org, or any of your chapter health contacts. We are more than happy to discuss your procedures and process and answer any questions that were not answered here. We appreciate you watching the recordings and learning more, even though you were not able to attend Officer Leadership Academy, or if you were and you're looking for a refresher, thank you for coming here for that. We appreciate all of you using the resources that we spend a lot of time putting together.